Hey guys, it's Dr. Hayes, and this is a video that I'm recording about Peter Pan because we were supposed to read Peter Pan in class this week, but we got some snow, so I'm recording the video for you to watch instead. So what I'm going to do is I have a video that I normally show in class, another YouTube video, and it is really good about going over the background of J.M. Barrie and his story and where he got Peter Pan and the history of the text, and it even recaps the plot a little bit. So I'm going to link that video into the description of this video, and then I'll email it out to everyone. So I would like you to watch that video first. So if you haven't watched that video yet, the one linked in the description and the one that I'm sending out, if you haven't watched that one yet, the Messed Up Origins is what it's called, of Peter Pan, then stop this and go ahead and watch that one, and then watch this one after that, because that gives a lot of background information. So yeah, watch that one for some background about Barrie and Peter Pan in the text. So I have some copies, different versions of Peter Pan that I thought I'd show you, and I can go ahead and show you those first. And then I want to talk about the text you had to read, the play, a little bit of note on that text, and then I have a few different themes that I wanted to go over, a couple different scenes to point out, and different ways to read this text, different interpretations that people have come up with over the years. And these are, again, things we would normally talk about in class. And so in your reading responses, and maybe the next time we meet, if you have something out, that you need to discuss or talk to, maybe we can do it then. But this is the way we can do it before that. Some copies. I have this really cool illustrated edition. It was edited by Maria Tartar. She is a very well-respected children's lit scholar. She usually specializes in fairy tales, but she did this illustrated edition too. She edited this. So this is a really cool edition. I can bring it to class next time if anybody wants to look through it. But it has all kinds of cool pictures and background about Barrie and the Llewellyn Davies boys and the family, which you read about or heard about in the last video. There's the Peter Pan statue, and it has the whole play, but then it has and other artwork. It has annotations. It's really cool. I'm trying to see if there's a cool picture, and then I think there's a section in the back about different movie adaptations that have come out throughout the years, Hook and various other live action movie and TV adaptations as well. So this is a really cool book. I'm really proud of. Of course, we talk about chapbooks. Well, here's the modern day chapbook, the little golden book. This is the little cheap golden book version of the cartoon of Peter Pan, but a lot of people grew up several generations of, they never read any text of Peter Pan. They just, if they read anything from Peter Pan, it was based on the movie, the Disney movie Peter Pan. Most people's experience with Peter Pan is the cartoon movie, or maybe a live action movie, or there's some recordings of stage versions of Peter Pan, which interestingly, Peter Pan is usually played by a woman in the play version, because a woman can be more nimble and boy-like and childlike. So a lot of times a woman, the most famous, Mary Martin is the most famous person. Back in the 60s and 70s, I think. I'm not exactly sure when that played. I have to look it up. But she played Peter Pan on stage pretty famously back in the day. In the Messed Up Origins book or video that you watched, he talked about this book, Peter Pan and Kensington Gardens, and then the book Peter Pan and Wendy. So the text of Peter Pan has gone through various iterations. It was a play. Well, first it was in the book Little White Bird, which was an adult book that J.M. Barrie wrote. There was like one little section in the middle where a character was telling a story about this boy who fell out of his stroller in Kensington Garden in the park, and sort of became this fairy baby child and lived in the park, and there was this whole story about this ever young boy, and that character is not what Peter Pan is based on. Like, it's not the plot of Peter Pan that we know of the play and the movies, but that character inspired, the the Peter Pan story. So that little section of Little White Bird was pulled out, and a lot of it has published by itself as Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. And then the play came after that, the play that you read and the plot that most people are familiar with came after that. And then the plot of the play was turned into a novel called Peter and Wendy. And this collection has both of them in it. So it went sort of back and forth, and then movies were made, and then it was in plays again. So the character, when you say, oh, do you like Peter Pan? Like, that's just a character that appears in multiple versions and different sort of iterations and plots and things depending on which text you're talking about. So it is more like just a grouping of texts than it is like one particular narrative, one particular story. I will mention that the copy of the play that you read in your textbook, it might have seemed pretty descriptive. Like, it's real big, huge, long paragraphs describing the scenes and describing the setting, describing Neverland, describing how the characters are feeling, and there's a lot of background stuff. And then there's this big, long introduction beforehand from Barry, a few pages where he's talking about writing it and talking about the Llewellyn Davies boys and the different adventures that they had. Well, that's because the version of the play you're reading it's a literary screenplay. And what that means is that it was meant to be read. Normally when you go see a play, you don't get a description of all this background stuff. The big, long, very poetic and lyrically descriptive passages about Neverland and the feeling that the characters get when they go there and what it looks like and all that. You don't get that from when you're watching the play. And so when you're reading a version of a play that has all that in there, a lot of times, and this is the case for this one, it was written and edited to be something that you read. A performance screenplay for the people involved in the production is much more sparse than that. But this is a literary screenplay, and this one was published years later. The original screenplay, the original play staged in 1901, I believe, and this version of the play that was published to be read by the general public was published 28 years later. So Peter Pan as a play had already done well, been popular. The Llewellyn boys had grown up. So this is more of a melancholy, nostalgic, retrospective, looking back on the experiences version of the play, with the introduction at the beginning and the big full descriptions. So this one is a little bit more pensive and moody with the descriptions of the scenes and the moods and stuff. So I wanted to kind of mention that's the version you're reading. It's a literary screenplay written much later than the original one staged. Okay, so let me talk about some scenes from the thing, and then I do have one more thing to show you. It's like show and tell at the end, like a little treat. So, so some ways to read this text. I have some notes here. That's why I'm looking off to the side. So the description of Neverland itself, let's talk about that for a second. So we're told that it has all of these different segments. I think they're on page 1322 and 23 is where they get to Neverland, and we have all these descriptions of Neverland itself, as it has all of these regions all mushed together in one island. There's the pirate lagoon, the mermaid lagoon, the pirate ship, and where they are. There's where the Native Americans are, their village. There's the area, the woods where the Lost Boys live, and their treehouse, their secret hideout. So this island seems to basically have everything you could possibly want to fuel your imaginative play. And so it's not a realistic place, obviously, because there's not really any way to get there. Second star to the right and straight on to morning is not really directions. It's a non place. And so it is a stand-in for any sort of imaginative landscape that a child might want. Think of it as, you know, the movie Zootopia that came out a couple years ago? It's very similar to Zootopia, where all the different biospheres, or the zones, were all next to each other. The desert and the snow area and the rainforest and all were all, you could just take a train from one to the other. That's how Neverland is. And so it's not a realistic place. You can play cowboys and Indians in the morning, and then you can fight pirates in the afternoon, and then watch some mermaids in the sunset, and then go home. You know, it's just kind of a functional stand-in for childhood imagination, which is something that Barry was kind of obsessed with. He was, as you saw in the other video, he was very stunted in his development. He was stuck in boyhood, very preoccupied with the business of boyhood and being a boy and being young, and what the responsibilities of being a young boy were. And so Neverland is a perfect canvas for that kind of imaginative play. So I wanted to talk about that for just a second. I also want to mention the role of women in the play. There's a lot of focus on boyhood and the Lost Boys and Peter and Hook and all that. But before that, I wanted to make sure we saw what Barry was doing with the role of women in Neverland. It's no secret and it's very obvious that Barry had mommy issues, you know, with his mom, and his weird relationship with her after his brother died, and how he never had children. He married, and his marriage was kind of loveless, and they never had children. So he has issues with motherhood, and so the book or the play frequently comes back to that. We have the scene when they first arrive in Neverland, all the kids, and Wendy is shot down out of the sky, which we'll talk about in a second. And they think she's dead. She's been shot out of the sky. They think it was like a bird. They thought she was a bird because Tinkerbell tricked them. But they're like, we need to wake her up so she can make us dinner, right? And so the way that they wake her up is they build a house around her. And they're like, oh, they think she's dead, but they're like, well, she needs to stop being dead so she can make us dinner, which is kind of a woman's job. Like, I know you're dead, but I'm hungry, so can you make me dinner? It's kind of a comment on a woman's place in the home, so they build a house around her, and then all of a sudden smoke starts coming out of the chimney, and she comes out, and she's fine, right? So it's like putting her in her domestic place, building a house around her, putting her in her domestic sphere, revived her and gave her purpose again, and she was able to live. And so even when they get back to the clubhouse much later, there's the whole scene where she's basically their mom. Like, she makes sure they're nice and use their manners at dinner, and she sits by the fire and mends their socks, and she puts them all to bed and tells them a story, and there's this whole role play they do with her being their mother. And part of the time Peter is like their father, but part of the time he's one of the sons as well. His role in the situation is fluid, and when he plays as the father for too long, he gets kind of uncomfortable with it, and he has to switch, and he has to double check with her that they're just pretending. She's like, yes, and she gets a little offended by it. But I think it's kind of telling that her role. Okay, so they go to Neverland, which is set up as this perfect imaginative landscape where any game you could possibly think of to play make-believe with is available. But if you're the only girl, you go to a perfectly fantastical make-believe land, and you're still make-believing of playing house. Like, you're still the mom or the wife, and you still have to clean and cook and take care of the kids and things like that. And so while the boys have the adventure of fighting pirates and going to rescue Native American princesses and things like that, the girl who goes to this magical and imaginative wonderland place has to still stay at home and cook and clean, which is kind of messed up when you think about it. So a lot of people have noticed Wendy's role in this play is very significant, especially if you think back to the very beginning scene in the before they leave before Peter comes, before they go to Neverland. The whole premise is that it's time for Wendy to grow up. She is getting to the age where, little children stayed in a nursery, which was like, a nanny would come and take care of them, and that's where they had their toys and everything. But then when you sort of came of age, it was time for you to grow up and have your own private bedroom and start taking care of yourself, and you didn't spend all your time in the nursery. And a lot of times little British children, when they grew out of the nursery, is when it was time for them to maybe either go away to school if you were a boy, or start having regular lessons from a governess or a tutor if you were a girl. And so it's been announced that it's time for Wendy to grow up. And that is not a popular decision. And so they run away to this imaginative place. And while she's playing in this imaginative Neverland, her option is to pretend to be a grown-up, to pretend to be a woman. So as you can imagine, lots and lots of scholars, modern feminist scholars especially, have just jumped all over Wendy's fate in Neverland and her treatment and her options there. The other women or female characters in Neverland are troublesome as well. Tinkerbell is mean. I don't know if y'all picked up on that. In the Disney one, she's a little bit more less threatening. They've cut out the whole scene in the Disney cartoon. They cut out the whole scene where she tricks the Lost Boys into trying to kill Wendy when she gets there. In the play, she's like, Peter says that that's the Wendy bird and you're supposed to shoot her out of the sky. And so Toodles is like, okay, we do what Wendy says. And they shoot her out of the sky, and that's when they think she's dead. They cut that whole part out. There's a little bit of vindication in the cartoon of how Tinkerbell is cranky and mean. When she's shut in the drawer and when they're doing the whole thing with the shadow, and she's like, and she does her head and she turns all red, So she has kind of a tude in the movie as well, but in the book she's dangerous. Like she tells lies, she deceits, and it all stems from jealousy. It all stems from her being jealous of Wendy coming in and threatening her position with Peter, right? And so some people have suggested that it's like a love rivalry. There's definitely this feminine territorial situation happening. But either way, it shows, Barry did not have very complimentary thoughts about sort of the female interactions and the feminine relationship with youth and boy, and he felt he had these issues with motherhood. So Tinkerbell's kind of mean. The mermaids are mean. They splash Wendy and they are real haughty and hateful, and because they flirt with Peter, but they're mean to Wendy. So the mermaids have kind of the same thing. Tiger Lily, the Native American princess, she's very haughty and proud, and so I don't really know the answer, but there's definitely some troublesome depictions of the women in Neverland. There's one more thing to say about the mothers thing. There's the whole scene with the pirates where they're talking, Smee mentioned something, one of them mentioned something about a mother, and the pirates, they don't know what that is. What's a mother, right? And Wendy's horrified. They don't even know what that is. And her shocked response when they're hiding and spying on the pirates is what almost gets them caught. And so the whole idea of all of these bad people and these wild boys and all of that, all they really need to tame them and make them good again is the loving influence of a mother. And so a woman's role and responsibility in this world is objectified as basically how she can take care of and tame the wildness out of young boys, or the cruelty out of grown men. So there's a little bit of troubling depictions there of women. So I won't go on any more about that. Let's talk about the loss of boyhood. That's probably one of the main interesting ideas from this play. That's something that Barry himself was very preoccupied with, about holding on to boyhood forever and holding on to youth. The turn of the century, when this was coming out, when when Winnie the Pooh, which we read for class as well, was coming out. This loss of boyhood and this loss of childhood was very concerning to authors at the time, and so Barry himself, because of personal reasons, was even more preoccupied with it. So something to note. There's a lot of symbolism in here about growing up and boyhood leaving and never being able to come back, and then once you do mature out of boyhood into manhood, you are sort of affected in a negative way permanently. And so you have Peter himself, who is this representation of the ethereal, intangible essence of boyhood. He is this little wispy sprite of a character. You can't touch him. I don't know if you've noticed that all throughout the play, if anyone ever tries to touch him physically, they can't. He either stops them or to ask them not to or whatever. And nobody ever makes physical contact with him. So that's sort of a symbol of the fleeting fragility of boyhood. He also has a terrible memory. He doesn't remember things from one scene to the next. Of things he said, he doesn't remember what they're doing. He doesn't remember what the game is. At the end of the play, when he comes back to visit Wendy, she mentions something about, have you told Tink? And he's like, who? And Wendy is horrified by that, because Tink was Peter's sidekick and best friend, and he's like, who? He doesn't remember. And when she is alarmed, he gets kind of alarmed, right? And he's like, oh gosh, he's kind of scared, and he plays it off. And so his complete lack of memory of a goldfish, where he doesn't remember anything from one scene to the next, or things he said or promised, is also this representation of this fleeting sense of youth that you just cannot grasp, you can't keep a hold of. Probably one of the most compelling symbolic images in the play that represents this, though, is the interplay between Hook and Peter, or just Captain Hook himself. So this might blow your mind if you didn't notice this. So think about Captain Hook. Okay, so Captain Hook and the pirates are the grown men on that. There's, the in the Indian tribe, there's some men as well, but the men, and they're all single men. They don't know what a mother is. They don't have sort of a feminine influence, so that's kind of key. But you have Hook, who his great nemesis is Peter Pan, who is a representation of youth, the embodiment of boyhood, right? Well, he's constantly trying to chase him, catch him, to capture him in some way, but he can't quite get his hands on him. Youth essentially slips his grasp every time he tries to reclaim it, which is kind of the essence of manhood, right? No matter how much you try to go backwards and reclaim your youth, you can't. It's gone. You can't grasp it. And so, to even further compound this symbol, Hook is missing his hand, right? So that's kind of part of his character. He has a hook for a hand. Well, we're told that the hand that he's missing was devoured by this crocodile. It was eaten by this crocodile. This crocodile got a piece of him once, and now it's stalking him throughout his whole existence, slowly just trying to catch up with him and find him and devour the rest of him whole, right? Well, this crocodile has also swallowed a clock, and so it makes a ticking sound wherever it goes. If that's not on the nose, I don't know what is. You have this monstrous, devouring creature slowly stalking this grown man, and it is a symbolic, literal embodiment of time. It's ticking and ticking and ticking, and it's like time itself is eating him piece by piece. That is a representation of this paranoia of growing old, of your life passing you by, of youth is gone, you cannot get it back, and not only is your youth gone and you can't get it back, but time is slowly eating away at you piece by piece, and pretty soon all of you is gone. Symbolized by when you're old, or when you get old enough to pass away, when you die. And so that's really something that all of us have to face, is that, time is devouring us and chasing us, and once our youth is gone, it's gone, that kind of thing. But the whole saga of Hook and his, running away from time, trying to capture youth and not being able to, it is very, again, on the nose of things that Barry himself was thinking about and dealing with and coping with. And it's really interesting that, in the original play, one of the stage directions was to have the same actor should play Mr. Darling, the father, at the beginning. Wendy and Michael and John's father. And the same actor should play Mr. Darling and Captain Hook. Because it's the father figure in both. And in the Disney cartoon, it's the same voice actor that plays both. They're actually kind of drawn similarly. If you look at their faces, Mr. Darling in the beginning with his tuxedo that kind of rolls up on him, and it's got the drawing on it. Mr. Darling and Hook look similar. But Mr. Darling looks like an older, middle-aged version of Hook who's let himself go and doesn't have adventures anymore. But I think that's intentional. That's an intentional thing. Because Mr. Darling is the grumpy ho-hum dad in the beginning who is forcing Wendy to grow up. And so the fact that he's the villain once they get to Neverland and who's being vexed by boyhood and is chasing his youth and everything, it's very telling. But let's see if there's anything else I wanted to. Yeah, so that's pretty much all the main readings I wanted to talk about from Peter Pan. There are all kinds of other things in here. Obviously, there's people have pointed out problematic racial issues with the offensive depiction of Native Americans, and especially in the Disney one. Ooh, it's really bad. The whole sequence of the "Why is the red man red?" There's like a whole thing, and it's just cringy to watch in the Disney version. But those there's similar scenes that are where they're mimicking the accent and the language of the Native Americans in the play, and those are recreated from games that Barry and the Llewellyn Davies boys used to play, which they didn't really used to have concerns about that kind of thing back then. So yeah, if there's other things that, other scenes that stood out to you, other characters that stood out to you, things that you want to talk about, you can put those in your reading response. As I said, I have one more thing to show you in the videos. It's gotten dark in here. Let me turn my light on. There you go. I was sitting here and the sun was going down. It's gotten dark. Let me turn this brightness down a little bit. There we go. That'll do. And so I wanted to show you my pop-up book. I showed you, this is my Robert Sabuda. I showed you the Alice in Wonderland one in class. And I had says, as promised, I said, I'll bring the Peter Pan one when we talk about Peter Pan. Well, we're not doing it in person, so I'll just show it to you here. I'll try to show it to you on the video. But let's see. So this is the first page. It's pretty neat. Like it's supposed to be London. You can see London, and then there's clouds all around, and that's the moon, and you can see Peter's shadow on the moon, and these are all like clouds and things, and this is Peter flying, and his shadow is here on the moon, and you can see the city laid out underneath the clouds. Over here we have Nana, the dog. And then we have, she's sewing. There's some string, that's actual string. And she's trying to sew the shadow on. And then this one is when they're all like jumping out of the window. You can kind of see they're jumping out of the window. It's kind of interesting. I'm sure it looks better. It would look better in person, but this is the best we can do. This is a cool scene. So this is once you get to the island, and it's like the beach. You can see there's a waterfall there and the lagoon. So what do we got down here? We have all the kids down here. Whoop. Not sure what that is. Oh, yeah, it's a cannon. It's a cannonball firing out of a ship. That's pretty neat. What are you guys doing? I think that one's caught. Is that caught there? No? Okay. Oh, I think that's just the boys running around playing. Yeah. It's kind of hard to see on the camera. And then... well, the trees are getting in the way. Move, trees. Oh, there's Hook. We have Hook down there. And then we have Smee on this page. This page is so complicated with all the trees. Okay. What's this one? Oh, this one's really cool. This is their hideout. And you can kind of see they have... see it shaking? Their little socks are hanging on a line where Wendy's doing their laundry. And you can see right up in there is a basket where Michael is sleeping. Little basket up in there. And you can see them all getting into bed, and she's that's Wendy right there. She's got a little ribbon where she's hanging up things. Oh yeah, this over here, there's some cool stuff over here. Let me maybe move this down a little bit and we can see better. Okay. This one's, something's caught. Oh, there we go. So they're trying to bring Wendy back to life. That's what that one is. And this is Tinkerbell hiding underneath, hiding in her little box. Okay. This one, this is pretty cool. This is when they're playing with the mermaids. And so it kind of folds out in there with the mermaids. And this one goes up. There's Tiger Lily, who's been captive. There's actual little string around her hands, like she's been tied up with a rope. And then that's... I have no idea. Oh, that's one of the pirates peeking in. And that's them fighting the knife and the hook, that when Peter and Hook fight. And that's a kite. It's kind of hard with the light to see. Yeah, okay. Tuck those back in. Get in there. Okay. So here's a cool thing. This is, you can kind of see Tinkerbell fly across the sky as Peter, like, reaches out. It's pretty neat. So Tinkerbell moves across the sky, and Peter, like, is like, wah, he takes off. This side over here, there are several things over here. What's going on? Oh, this is her little lantern. You can kind of see a silhouette and the little thing. This is he's rescuing, or they're fighting with the Indians. That's what that is. This is the poison. Yeah, that's all on that page. And then this one is broken, but the ship is supposed to stand up, but it doesn't. There's something in there that's broken where it doesn't do it on its own. I keep meaning to get in here and fix it, but those are supposed to stand up a little bit higher, the sails. I need to fix it, but there's a ship there at the end. There's the plank, where they have to walk the plank. There's the crocodile. His little mouth opens. And then that's when they're home with their parents again. So it's pretty cool. I feel like there's a page that I missed, but maybe I didn't. There's this one. I thought there was one where I think that might be a different book where there's a one of the pirates is sneaking into their hideout. But I think that might be a different. Oh yeah, I did. I skipped it. It's over here. It's on this page. It's kind of a cool thing. It's one of the pages over here that I skipped. Where it's the secret entrance to their hideout, and the pirate's up here. He's about to slide down, and then his feet come out at the bottom because he's sliding in. So he's sliding in at the top, and then his feet slide down because to get into their hideout is this little slide down the tree. Okay, so anyway, that's my pop-up book of Peter Pan. It's probably cooler looking in person, but at least I tried to show you a little bit, especially, and it's too bright here to really see good, but yeah, hopefully that was a neat little show and tell. And like I said, if there's any scenes that I didn't pull out, there was a few things I wanted to pull out from the play, not to try to overwhelm you, but mainly to call your attention to the depiction of the female characters and Wendy's whole situation in the play, and Tinkerbell and the mermaids and all that, and also before that, the description of the function of Neverland itself as a representation of imagination, and also the main one was the loss of boyhood, and how Peter represents youth and Hook represents adulthood, and how the crocodile represents time trying to devour him, and how he cannot grasp youth and everything. That is such a powerful series of symbols in this play, and a lot of times students are like, oh my goodness. I mean, I've seen this 100 times, but it never occurred to me to think of it that way. So maybe some of you have that reaction, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. But yeah, it totally makes sense. And maybe some of you are like, yeah, that's obvious. But I've read this a bunch of times, so it's clear to me. But maybe if you're not as familiar with the text, it's cool. It's a cool realization that that those symbols are there. Anyway, y'all stay safe and warm. And if you have any questions, you know how to get in touch with me. Otherwise, just turn in your reading responses. Go ahead and get ready to read the next thing. And I will see you in class next week. Bye.